Meeting now. So I'll call the meeting to order. I'll call to order the Electoral Area F Governance and Services Study Committee meeting on Wednesday, May 18th, 2022 at 6:05 p.m. And I'd like to take this moment to respectfully acknowledge that this meeting is being held on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish First Nations. Good evening, everybody. I'll start off by congratulating you on your appointment to the Regional District of Nanaimo's Electoral Area F Governance and Services Study Committee. My name is Elizabeth Hughes, and I'm the Manager of Strategy and Intergovernmental Services at the Regional District of Nanaimo. And I'll just take us through the agenda until the committee chair is appointed by the committee a little bit later on in the meeting. What I'll start with is I'll do a quick roll call now, providing a record of those who are in attendance, and then we'll just follow up shortly with proper introductions. So online, we have, joining us by Zoom, we have Gareth Mogg, who is with the Provincial Ministry of Municipal Affairs. And Gareth, I'll come back to you in a minute for an introduction, but I'm just doing the roll call right now. And I think Mr. Mogg is the only person calling in through Zoom. There's nobody else? Okay, great. And in the room then, and please forgive me if I mispronounce your name. I'll try not to. We have Carrie Pesey, David Karras, Deirdre LaForest, Derek Grimmer, Fred Manson, Jennifer Watt, Ken Pickering, Miles Porter, Andy Rigg, and as well, Director Leanne Salter, the Electoral Area F Director, who sits as a member, an ex officio member of this committee. She sends her regrets tonight, and attending in her place this evening is alternate Director Julian Fell. As well, we have our study consultant team here tonight, Alan Nielsen of Nielsen Strategies, and we'll certainly hear more from our consulting team a little bit later, and Sherry Hurst of Left Side Partners. Present from the Regional District of Nanaimo, we have Douglas Holmes, the RDN's Chief Administrative Officer, sitting next to me. And I do want to note the team of Carol Loudon, Lisa Bobotham, and Paul Rajendram, who are here to take minutes and ensure the technology is working and generally assist the meeting in running smoothly. So thank you very much to the staff. And I think that's everyone in terms of the roll call. In terms of quorum, we do have quorum since we have more than 5 committee members present, so certainly the meeting can continue. So now we can move on to item 2.1 in the agenda. It's the point where we can be properly introduced. And if we could start with the committee members and perhaps go around the table, and if you could state your name and a little bit about yourself to get us started as an introduction. Perhaps Mr. Grimmer, we could start with you.
Hi, my name is Derek Grimmer. I've been a resident of Arrington since 2010. I've been a physicist by training. I've been in the solar energy business for over 40 years. So basically,
my name is Carrie Pesey, and I am a resident of Hillers for over 20 years, 22 years. And I have very many concerns about environment and making sure that's a thing that we look at. And I also am the community rep for Mount Arrowsmith Advisory.
I'm Deirdre LaForest. I was born and raised in Arrington. I've lived here all my life except 8 years. I mostly worked in social work and mental health and addiction most of my career. And I was very involved in volunteer activities with school packs, provincial parent associations, and all that stuff.
I'm Fred Manson. I've been an RDN resident since 1994, Arrington property owner for the last 4 years. I've lived here for 1 year, 35 years of municipal experience, 11 years as a CAO for the city of Parksville.
I'm Andy Rigg. I've been a resident of Hilliers for 17 and a half years. I'm retired, and I figure I owe the community a bit because I did quite well here.
What would you like to know?
What's your name? Start with your name and.
Miles Porter. I've been here for over 40 years. Yeah, it's not a bad place, but too much dissension, there's too much bureaucracy, too much interference in people's, what the people want here, as far as I'm concerned. There seems to be a general distrust on both sides. And I'm hoping we can maybe sort that out a little better this time. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Ken Pickering. I moved here 6 years ago from Squamish. I spent 50 years there. I'm retired, but I have a forestry, sawmilling, and builder supply background.
My name is Jennifer Watt. I've been here 20-ish years on and off, and I have a couple of young, small kids here, and I'm part of the Arrington Hall Board and the PAC, and I work for Forest BC.
Yeah, I'm Julian Fell. I was RDN director from 2011 to 2018. I have lived in Arrington, South Arrington for 34 years.
I'm David Karras. I've lived in this area since 1984. Just a block away, raised my whole family there. I've enjoyed this community immensely. It's been a very awesome place. Again, I'd like to be a part of the community and actually help us be better. And now I've been in the forest industry for 40 years. Still working. But, looking forward to this.
Thank you. Let's go now to Gareth Mogg from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. Gareth, can you hear me? Calling in through Zoom?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Gareth.
Excellent. Good evening, everybody. I did just want to caveat this with, we've had a bit of a windstorm here in Victoria today, so my internet is out. So I'm currently hotspotting through my cell phone to attend this meeting. So if at any point I do cut out, I apologize. I will try to rejoin as quickly as possible. So yes, good evening, everybody. Thank you for attending today. My name is Gareth Mogg. I'm a senior planning analyst here at the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. And I will be the person responsible for overseeing the governance and services study for Area F and the RDN from the ministry's perspective. I would like to begin by recognizing that I am calling in today from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen people, also known as the Esquimalt and the Songhees First Nations. I'd also like to thank Alternate Director Fell, Alan and Sherry, the consultants this evening, RDN staff and the study committee for your time this evening as we begin work on this exciting project. So I do want to just provide a little bit of, I've got a bit more of an introduction as well to provide around the ministry's role. Elizabeth, I'm not sure if that's something you wanted me to delve into now or whether or not you wanted to continue with further introductions.
We can talk about roles and responsibilities, I think, a little bit later on in the agenda. Yeah, that we'll certainly come back to you though, Gareth, for that, absolutely. So thank you very much for that introduction. Moving now to the Area F Governance and Services Study Consulting Team for introductions. Alan?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good evening. My name is Alan Nielsen, and I work as a local government consultant, and I've been doing that for about 25 years now. I have spent some time working inside local government at both a municipal level and also at a regional district level, most recently in Metro Vancouver, the regional district there. But I do this kind of work that with my colleague Sherry, whom you'll meet in a moment, we do a lot of these kinds of studies, these governance and service studies, incorporation studies, generally kind of referred to as restructure studies. We are very interested. We're kind of local government nerds, I guess you could say. So this stuff is right up our alley, and we're really looking forward to working with the committee and with the community. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Sherry Hurst, and I'm part of the consulting team as well. I'm an urban planner by education, but I've been working as a local government consultant for not quite as long as Alan, but almost over 20 years. And yeah, these are governance and services studies, and working with the province and with committees like yourselves are one of our preferred types of studies to be working on. So thank you for welcoming us into your community.
Thank you very much, everybody, for those introductions. Have I missed anybody? I don't think there's anybody else on Zoom. Doug, sorry, I missed you.
I don't really have anything to add to that. I think anything that I say will be getting in the way of doing your work. So I'll just pass it along.
Okay, okay, thanks. Okay, item 3 then, we'll move to the approval of the agenda. So we will need a mover to adopt the agenda as presented. You have the agenda in front of you in your binder here. And so if we could have a voting committee member move the agenda and then a seconder. we can move on with the meeting. Does someone wish, moved by David,
I'll say.
seconded, we need a voting committee member to seconded by, sorry, Ken. I've got glasses for every occasion here, so thank you very much. Is there any discussion on the agenda? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 4 of the agenda is the selection of the committee chair and the vice chair. So regional district board meetings can tend to be a little formal, but this is a residents committee and we can address this part of the process a little bit less formally. So I'd like to invite interested persons to put their name forward for the positions of chair, and then we'll do vice chair. So we'll start with chair. What we can do is we can conduct the selection of the chair and the vice chair of your committee by a show of hands of the voting members of the committee. And if only one person puts their name forward, then that candidate would be declared by acclamation. And if more than one candidate puts their name forward, each candidate would have a minute or two to speak on why they want to serve in the role of chair or vice chair, after which there would be a vote by a show of hands. So if I can invite interested persons to put their names forward for the position of chair.
David Karras.
David, okay, great. I'll call for a second time. So far, we have one person, David Karras, who's put his name forward. Anybody else at all for the position of chair? Since you put your name forward, I'm assuming you do accept this nomination as chair?
I accept it. Thank you.
Thank you. I declare that David Karras has been selected as chair for the Electoral Area F Governance and Services Study Committee. Congratulations, Chair. And in a minute, I will bring the placard right over to you.
Bring my chair.
Your chair. Moving on to, before I turn it over to the chair, selection of 4.2, selection of the committee vice chair. Is there anybody who would like to put their name forward for consideration for vice chair? Jennifer?
Yes.
Okay. I will call for a second time. Anybody else wishing to put their name forward for the position of vice chair? Hearing and seeing none. And since you put your name forward, I assume you accept this nomination as vice chair? Yes. Thank you very much. I declare that Jennifer Watt has been selected as vice chair for the Electoral Area F Governance and Services Study Committee. Congratulations, Chair. Congratulations, Vice Chair. I now turn the meeting over to the committee chair, David Karras. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So study committee number 5. 5.1 committee terms of reference, page 3.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question? Would you like me just to start on some materials here? Because I've got a bit of a PowerPoint here and I don't want to put you on the spot, but.
That'd be great.
Okay, yeah.
Just for clarification, I'm not going to be reading all of these.
Not at all, no.
Okay, thanks.
So
Yeah, and pass it back to me.
Absolutely, yeah. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So just as Elizabeth mentioned, well, these meetings, while the board meetings tend to be very formal, and this meeting will have some degree of formality, as will our future meetings, and we rely on the chair to assist us and to lead us in that respect. We can also be a little bit informal. So what we typically like to do in these early meetings, and in this first meeting most particularly, is to do a few things. One is to kind of set the stage for the study, as it were. So we want to spend a little bit of time going through the role of the committee, the purpose of the study, the process that we're going to follow over the course of the study, and then get into kind of a little bit of information about the local government system, look at regional districts versus municipalities, and then finally talk a little bit about the community engagement aspect, which is going to be a very important part of the work of the committee as we move forward in the study. And so that is kind of the game plan, as it were, Mr. Chair. And we put together a few slides, and we'd be happy to kind of walk through some of that material and then hand it back to you to facilitate some questions and answers, if that works for you.
Great.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, let's start just, if I could, just with the purpose really of the inaugural meeting here. It's really 3 parts. One, we are here to, first of all, review the purpose of the study and the process that we have set out in our materials that we'll go through it with the committee in some detail, just to make sure that we are all kind of understanding of the process, understanding of the purpose, and that we're kind of on the same page. We want to talk a little bit then about the roles and responsibilities of the parties. The committee obviously is such an important party, so we'll talk about that, but we want to talk about all the other parties that are involved in this study, because there's a number of them. And so it's always helpful to understand who's going to be responsible for what as we go through this next year together, because there's going to be a little break for the election and stuff, and there's a break for the summer, but we've got a good year together. So we want to get off on the right foot. And then finally, in this initial meeting, we want to talk a bit about the system of local government. And that will hopefully become, why we're doing that will become apparent as we go through the study and as we go through our slides. So I'll leave that for now and just jump right in, if I could, Mr. Chair, and talk a bit about the study committee. Wonderful. And as you mentioned, we'll start with kind of roles and responsibilities from our terms of reference. And rather than going through the terms of reference in any detail, because I think the group has had a chance, or you've got the materials and you've got them in your binder now, which has been put together very helpfully by RDN staff. But what we thought we would do is to draw out a few key points from the terms of reference. And the first is the notion of neutrality and objectivity. So two notions really. And when we look at a study committee, it's a very important role that the committee plays. It's a very important body. It's the body that is going to be responsible over the next while for overseeing the work of the consultants, for making sure that the work of the consultants makes sense to the committee and therefore will make sense to the community. And in reviewing all of that material, keeping an open mind, being very neutral, being objective, and holding the consultants to account for that, but also holding yourselves to account for that, because it's very difficult. Everybody comes into studies such as this one that are restructure studies in nature, that in the sense that we're looking at different forms of local government. We have a current form now as an electoral area of the regional district. There's the potential down the road to look at some alternative form of local government. And we all, as human beings, come to the table with different perspectives, different biases, and so forth. And the committee members, as members of the community, would have lots of thoughts. And that's why you're here, of course, because you're interested in this topic and you want to provide some leadership to the community and you want to assist the community. And that's all great, having all those views and perspectives and biases and all those kinds of things. But as we're sitting here as committee members, as a committee, we want to be as neutral and as objective as possible so that we make sure that the community can receive the information and feel that the information that they're getting is unbiased and is objective and is the straight facts. So that's the first point that we emphasize in the terms of reference, and we'll want to hold ourselves to account for that, and we'll rely on our chair and vice chair to assist us in that respect. Another point then with regard to the committee and the terms of reference is we are a committee of the regional district of Nanaimo. And that's really important because the RDN is the corporate body here. It is the government, the local government for Area F. Excuse me. This committee, while the funding for this body, for this effort largely comes from the provincial government, not entirely, but largely, and we'll talk about the role of the province in a little bit, and we'll get some input from Gareth as well down in Victoria. But while all that is the case, the reality is that the regional district, as the local government for the area, needs to have a role in overseeing how the study is done and in making sure that there's a body in place, a body of community members, of citizens, that is in place to lead the study, to participate in the study, to make sure that everything is done in the study so that we meet our objectives. So the RDN then has created this committee to be that body to oversee this study. So it's a committee of the RDN, and that means there's certain rules that we need to follow that the RDN has in place, the written procedures, bylaw, and so forth. And we've got staff who can help us and they can advise the chair if need be on some of those things. But we are we do answer to somebody, as it were, and initially that somebody is the regional district, as the body that has created this committee. Yeah, it is. And it is, we've then also, the other point is all of you, of course, are appointed by the regional board. And that's important because you've gone through a great process to get here, you put your names forward, but ultimately the regional board has said, we're going to put these individuals on this committee because we think they're the ones who are going to do the best job for the community on this committee. The other point, or another point from the terms of reference is, and this speaks to kind of the role of the committee, to guiding the study. So this committee is not here to kind of determine the outcome of the study, but more to guide the study, to make sure that everything that we set out to do, that everything the consultants working with the committee set out to do in terms of the proper analysis and bringing the information forward and explaining it in ways that not only the committee, but the community can understand and can make informed or to have informed views about as well. All of that is really important to do. So that guiding and oversight is a key role of the Governance and Services Committee. And then working closely with the consultant. So everything that we do will come to this body, and your job will be to review it, to scrutinize it, to poke at it, to determine whether to ask the tough questions, to, at the end of the day, feel before it goes to the public in our engagement process, to feel that confident that everything that you've seen is worth now taking to the community and putting out in the community. So there's a big role for the committee to play in working with the consultants and reviewing that material. And I'll just go through a few more points, Mr. Chair, but then we'll pause and answer any questions. I've talked about the engagement process in that part of the program, and that is a very important bit, because one of the things is we'll note a little bit later when we talk about governance in British Columbia is that it is ultimately a matter that is determined by the local community. So irrespective of how far we go through this process and how many phases that we have, the province has said, kind of through policy that has lasted decades now, that we look to the community to articulate what kind of local governance it wants, how they want to make their decisions, how they want to receive their services, those kinds of critical questions. So that engagement program where we reach out with the findings of our work and engage with the public so that everybody understands what we've got in front of us, all of the different materials that are going to be so important to helping people form views and ultimately perhaps making a decision, that's going to be important as a role for this committee and your consultants. And one of the key jobs for the committee then is to scrutinize that engagement program and make sure that it's robust enough, in your view, to allow us to effectively reach people and help people understand the materials. You'll then also directly participate in that engagement. So this is where you get to kind of talk directly as committee members to members of the community, to your neighbors. And so we'll look forward to that as we enter that phase. You'll receive the consultant's report, which will be fairly lengthy, so it'll be a good read. Either that or a cure for insomnia, one of the two, hopefully the former. And we think it's great, but you'll receive that report at the end of the study. And again, your job will be to review that and make sure that you're comfortable with it and that you can put your name on it, as it were, to take forward. And then finally, in our terms of reference for this particular study, this committee may make recommendations to the board, and you don't have to make recommendations. It's not stated as a must in there, but you have the option to make recommendations to proceed to other phases of restructure. And we'll talk about what those phases could look like in a moment, but we'll be looking to you, and the community may be looking to you to determine whether you have recommendations to make initially to the regional board, which, as I mentioned, is the body that created you, and then ultimately through the board to the province. Mr. Chair, I will stop there and pause and just ask if there, maybe through you, if there are any questions and we can help address.
Thanks, Alan, for that. I don't have any questions, but does anyone else have any questions to Alan? Go ahead.
Okay, well, first of all, to clear something up, I've been vetoed as seconding motions, and I also vetoed for making motions.
You are an ex officio non-voting member of the committee, so you can join in the discussion, but you wouldn't be part of making or
Can't make a
seconding
motion,
motions.
can't second motion, can't vote. Yeah,
Correct.
okay.
Yes.
Does the committee have a website where we can communicate with each other? Send emails to each other?
Well, yeah, so we can, and we're gonna come to all that communication material in a moment, and if you want, we can jump back, we can get to that in a bit. Perfect. Okay, wonderful.
Anyone else? Questions? Hearing none, on to the next, number 6, purpose and process of governance and service study.
Yeah, actually, I'm just gonna take us back a little bit if I could, Mr. Chair, and just talk about roles and responsibilities as well in 5.2 and 5.3.
Great.
Thank you so much. So, and you'll have to, and unfortunately this evening, the committee will have to indulge us a little bit because as I mentioned at the outset, to this evening's meeting, you're going to be sick of our voices by the end because it is setting the stage for the meetings, making sure that we're all on the same page as it relates to roles, responsibilities, purpose, and all those kinds of things. So bear with us as we go through, and in the knowledge that at our subsequent meetings, there'll be much less talking from the consultants and much more talking from the committee. So roles and responsibilities. There are a number of different parties that are important to this study and to these kinds of studies. And we've already talked at length about the committee, so we'll move past the committee and we'll talk a little bit about the committee chair and the vice chair. So we've got our committee chair in place, we've got our committee vice chair in place. The role of the committee chair is to run the meetings as David is doing now. So running the meetings, making sure that's a key role of the committee, making sure that the committee gets through its business, helping to manage the committees. We will be communicating with is the first name okay? Okay. With the chair, with David in advance of the meetings and he will have the first look at the agenda because his role as chair is going to be then to manage that agenda. So as a courtesy, but also as a matter of good business, we want to make sure the chair is comfortable with the flow of the meeting as it's laid out in the future agendas. So we'll be doing that. The chair will also be the chief spokesperson for the committee. So to the extent that the committee kind of formally presents information to the community or to other bodies, the chair will be that spokesperson, and the chair will be assisted in that respect by the consultants, but also most importantly by the regional district and Elizabeth and her staff. The vice chair is kind of the backup, as it were. So if the chair goes down, the vice chair is up. And sorry, I don't mean to say go. I'm not predicting anything. So yes. So whenever the chair is not here or not acting as chair, then the vice chair steps in. And so having that good backup is really important, particularly as we get into the study, and we'll see that we have not only a number of committee meetings, but a number of public meetings as well. And so it may be that just because it's how life works, that the chair may not be able to make one of the meetings or something, or a public meeting. So we'll look to the vice chair then to run the meeting. Individual committee members. So you're all here as individual committee members. You have an important role to play in providing your input, in asking your questions, asking the tough questions as well of the process of the consultants, of each other, of debating and discussing information that comes before you. Always, of course, in a very civil and respectful manner. So that's going to be very key, and the chair will help us with that. No individual committee member has any executive authority in the sense being able to, and that includes the chair. So nobody gets to make decisions on his or her own. This is all part of a collective. So you're all part of a collective. We do have you're all voting members except for in our case the alternate director here, or the director, and I'll come to that role in a moment. But the committee members, again, just to emphasize that neutrality, that objectivity. Yes, we wouldn't be human if we didn't have our own ideas and perspectives on how we think things should be in our communities. That said, we do like to check those a little bit. And when we come to the committee, our role is not to advocate for a particular position or a particular outcome, but rather to ensure that all of the information has been put forward and has been debated and discussed. The time for advocacy will come later, once the committee's kind of finished its role. But while we're here on the committee, it's more about process, more about integrity of process, so that we make sure this can run smoothly. the electoral area director, or when the electoral area director is not here, the alternate director. So the electoral area director plays a very important role on the committee, and whenever I say the electoral area director, just know that I also am talking the alternate director who automatically fills in the absence of the director. So the electoral area director, very important role on the committee. He or she is the representative of the board on this committee and has that link to the board. And as kind of that link to the board and as that board member has a role to play back to the board to make sure that the committee is and the study is running smoothly. Because again, as a committee of the board, there's an obligation on the part of the board to ensure that things are running smoothly, that it's not kind of going sideways or we're not doing things we shouldn't be doing. And so the electoral area director helps in that respect. We also want to hear from the electoral area director as a member of the committee in all of the discussions the committee has. We don't have the electoral area director as a voting member because this process, first and foremost, is about community. And so we want non-elected community members who are members of the committee to really have that say. That said, we also want to ensure that the electoral area director brings his or her comments and perspectives and information and insights to the committee too, because that director will have important insights that we want to hear about in our discussions and will help to inform things. Can everybody good with hearing me? Okay, I do have a loud voice, yes. As my wife constantly tells me. Okay, so that's the electoral area director. The regional district board. So we are of course, and I've said this a number of times now, so I'll just very briefly, we're a committee of the board. The board is responsible ultimately for how this study is completed. It's accountable, it's responsible to the province because the regional district has taken provincial grants to run this process, and the regional district board is accountable for how that works and is accountable for the spending of those monies. So the board ultimately, as the governing body, has an oversight role. They'll be very hands-off. They'll be very hands-off because they, like the province, want to make sure that this is a grassroots bottom-up process. That's how the process is designed. That said, the board does have a role to play in providing some oversight. Regional district staff, we have our staff here. They'll work with the consultants. They'll work as needed with the chair, and then they'll advise the board to provide any information that's required, to provide all administrative help that's required, to make sure, in essence, everything runs smoothly. So a very important role for the regional district staff. They'll also play that a little bit of accountability role in making sure that we stay within the bounds of the procedure bylaw and everything that we need to stay within from that perspective. I will pause here and ask Gareth if he wants to talk a little bit about the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and the role the ministry plays.
Yes, thank you very much, Alan. Can you also... Hello?
Yep, we got you.
Oh, perfect. Yep, I just had a reconnecting message pop up. Perfect timing. So just let me know if I do cut out. So yeah, the role of the ministry supports this study in a number of ways. So as Alan has already mentioned, we have provided a grant to the Regional District of Nanaimo to hire Alan and Sherry to undertake the technical analysis and the engagement, as well as providing staff resources to support the committee whenever there may be questions that need to be answered and from the ministry's role and where the governance study is in relation to the restructuring process that the province provides. We also review drafts of the reports that have been submitted, both by Alan and Sherry, and any feedback from the engagement materials. We provide comments from time to time, and we will also participate in these meetings as needed. We're pleased to be supporting the RDN and undertaking the study. We look forward to seeing what comes from it. Essentially, though, as Alan has mentioned, this is a community and consultant-led process through the regional district. So it is really about trying to explore the needs of the community from the community's perspective. So yeah, thank you again for taking the time to make that commitment to your community, to explore in depth the governance that you have now, to understand how it functions, to learn more about the current structure and how you can support what your community's needs are. So the ministry does have a very, very hands-off approach, but we are involved at the review stages and intermittently throughout, but we're always available should there be any questions that arise.
Thank you so much. Now, I'll just mention two other bodies, if I could, Mr. Chair, and one is the consultants. So as Gareth just mentioned, we are the consultants that have been hired to do the technical analysis. So our job is to kind of move through the various parts of the study, making sure that we are meeting the objectives and sticking kind of within the scope of the terms of reference that for the study, advising the committee, giving all the information that the committee needs to inform its views and to have good discussions and to take information forward. And then also working with the committee to fashion a public engagement process, and then to work with the committee and take the committee through that process and engage with the community and make sure that the community gets all the information that the consultants are providing initially and to the committee. So our job really, we kind of do the legwork and we make sure that the committee hopefully looks good. So we're that we get the blame at the end of the day if that's not the case. But we anticipate that it will be a very worthwhile meeting or process. Last but certainly not least is the community. So at the end of the day, this is, as I noted, that local governance in British Columbia is about community. So what are the community's needs? How can we collectively address those needs? And how then, when we look at how those needs can be addressed, does that translate into different types of governance, different models of governance and service delivery? And what are the implications then for the type of local government we have? The community ultimately will be the deciders of that. And so we want to really work through the committee with the community to ensure that everybody who is interested in this kind of material from the community has a very clear understanding of the material and is able to ultimately make an informed decision, whichever when that point arises, and if it does indeed arise in the broader process that we're one phase of now. Mr. Chair, let me just mention 3 points here, if I could, and just with respect to administration and communication, and then we'll pass it back to the chair here. One is when we look at administration and communication, first of all, as I noted, the RDN staff administer the study and kind of help to administer the committee. Communication from the committee goes through the chair, go into the RDN. Now, as alternate director Phil asked earlier about communication kind of among committee members, of course, you're more than, as with community members, your neighbors and stuff, so members of the committee are more than able and happy to kind of communicate with one another through email and stuff, and whatever way you choose to communicate and have those discussions. We want to have robust discussions. The only thing we ask is that when we kind of come together, that our real discussions happen here collectively as a committee, and that when we speak to the community from the committee, we do it as a collective, we do it with one voice, and we do it through the chair, and that's going to be very important for the process. And the chair will be assisted in that regard by the consultants and by RDN to ensure that that the clarity of the message is there, that we're not sending out a whole bunch of different views that don't represent the collective view of the committee. I mentioned finally, again, I'll come back to the objectivity idea because I think it's very important to emphasize that the objectivity of all members of the committee, very important, really for the integrity of the process. Because if we kind of look, and we're going to talk about the broader kind of restructure, multi-phase process in a moment here, but if we kind of go all the way down to the end and we think we're going to be at the point one day where we may have a question that the community needs to answer with respect to the type of local government it wants for the community, we want to make sure that we've got there through a very defensible process that has looked at things objectively, that has had a neutral and objective committee leading it, that can kind of stand up to scrutiny. And so the objectivity of members and holding ourselves to account for that objectivity, very important for the process, the product, and ultimately any recommendations that come from this body. Okay, Mr. Chair, we'll pause there and happy to answer any questions before we move on to kind of other things.
Thank you. Open it up for questions. Alan? Go ahead, Derek.
Is there a list of the members here with email and telephone numbers so we can communicate? That's number one. But I'd like to see it.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll make sure that happens before we all leave, make sure we all connect up and
Thank you.
do that. Anyone else? Hearing none. On to 6. now.
Okay, yes, thank you.
Purpose and process of governance and service study.
Okay, wonderful. I'd like to, if I could, Mr. Chair, I'd like to kind of start a little bit big and kind of provide a bit of context because, and then bring it down a little bit more narrower to kind of the phase that we are at right now. This particular study is really, as I note on the screen here, is really a step on a path that considers changes that we may want or the community may wish to take with respect to its current local government structure. In British Columbia, we call these kinds of processes restructure processes. So local government restructure. And when we think of, and in essence, because this kind of study is part of a larger process that looks at potentially at changing the way we govern ourselves as a community, that is, we make decisions, how we make decisions, and changes kind of how we receive and how we receive and pay for the services that we need as well. So those kinds of changes are all part of the local government structure that we choose. So these restructure studies that we're part of right now are very important and they're very big and they follow a particular process that's very deliberate. And the province has set this process out because when you think about it, the kinds of changes that can ultimately occur as a result of this type of study and other phases that may follow, those changes can last generations. In the same way that we've had the current system of governance in place here since 1965. So these things don't change overnight, they don't change on a dime. So the province is very clear in setting out a deliberate process that will be too slow for some of you. I totally anticipate that because it's always the case. And we'll lose patience at some points, but there's a very deliberate way through it because at the end of the day, as I noted, we want to make sure that whatever we take forward is very defensible. And we've looked at everything because we know that what we're going to be asking people ultimately down the road is a question that will have implications for a long time. So let me go through a few ideas here. The study really then a step on a path that considers how the community may want to change its current local government structure. And when we kind of step back a little bit and just set the stage for that or try to explain that a little bit more, every community evolves over time. Every community has needs that change over time. We can look at the smallest communities to the largest cities. That's true. Everything changes in the same way that we as individuals change over time. Governance and service models need also then to change or to evolve in order to meet the needs that change. So as the community changes, as the needs change, we want to make sure that we have in place the governance model, so how we make decisions as a community, and also the service model, how we receive our services and provide those services. We want to kind of make sure that those evolve along with the community. Where we get a rub, where we kind of start to have issues arise or concerns arise, we can often then have a study like this, or those concerns can prompt this kind of study to help us understand what those concerns are, unpack those concerns a little bit, and also identify what kinds of changes may be on that menu or what kind of changes we may want to consider in order to address those concerns. The vehicle for kind of looking into that, for understanding the concerns, for identifying different ways to address those concerns, changes we may want to make, the vehicle to do that, the mechanism to do that is this study, this governance and services study. So again, it's going to help us understand what concerns there are with existing forms of governance and service delivery, and help us then identify the range of possible changes that we may want to consider. What you will find is that some of the changes, depending, we don't want to kind of presume too much here, or we don't want to prejudge what we're going to find as we go through and study as a committee, kind of what's in place today, but also reach out and engage with folks in the community and hear what their concerns are. So we don't know exactly what that's going to look like in its entirety. We have some sense probably, and you will have your individual thoughts on that. But some of the changes we may want to consider to address whatever concerns arise as we engage with people, is some of those changes may be within the existing structure. So it may be the case at the end of the day that we think, okay, based on the concerns we're hearing, based on the interests we're hearing related to governance and services, we can make some changes within the electoral area system, within the regional district system of governance that would address those concerns. That may be an outcome of this study. Or alternatively, we may look at some kind of structural change. There may be incorporation is something that is going to be in the view of the committee and in the view of the community. That may be something, a change that is necessary in order to address some of the concerns we hear about. So we'll have to be flexible as we go through it. We don't want to prejudge what the outcome can be, but we're going to be looking at what those concerns are that we hear, and then what are the kinds of changes we can think about. The committee, as we go forward, as we hear from the community, as we do our own work and engage with the community, we will then, as a committee, we will determine whether you want to make recommendations going forward. And those recommendations may identify possible changes, and they may recommend specific changes be studied further or be pursued further. If the committee recommends some kind of structural change, so if the committee, based on what we learn over the course of our work and based on what we hear from the community, if the committee determines, for example, that there needs to be some kind of incorporation of a portion of or of the entirety of the electoral area, that's a structural change. And that could then, and that would lead to further study, to further phases of study. Remember, I talked about this deliberate, drawn out process, which some of us will find very frustrating at times because it's going slowly, but it's meant to go slowly and it's designed that way. We have to be patient as we go through that. Ultimately, the Minister of Municipal Affairs determines if there's going to be other phases. So if this committee thinks, and if the committee chooses to make a recommendation at the end that there needs to be some kind of structural change, the minister will be the one then to receive that from the board of directors of the RDN and receive that recommendation, then consider that recommendation and determine whether to go forward. And you asked, why would the minister be involved at that point? And I'll just explain briefly. When we look at responsibilities of different levels of government, you all know about the Canadian Constitution, and we've got these two sections in the Constitution that divide, it's called the division of powers or the division of authorities. And those sections 91 and 92, they assign different powers to the federal government and different powers to the provincial governments. Local governments aren't listed in the Constitution because they didn't exist way back then as they do now. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But the provincial government in section 92 of provincial governments are given responsibility for municipalities, for local government. So for the administration of local services in every province across Canada, and indeed in other jurisdictions with similar situations across the world, but in Canada, in every province, the provincial government has created a system of local government. And each one of those systems includes at its core municipalities. Every system as well includes some kind of regional governance. We are very unique in British Columbia in that we have regional districts, and that's a different animal. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But the reason I mentioned the Constitution is because the provincial governments are the ones in Canada that have not only the responsibility to, or not only the ability, the power to determine how they're going to structure local governments in their provinces, but also the obligation, the duty to do that. And that's a responsibility that all provincial governments, and ours included, and in fact, I would even argue ours more so than many, take very seriously. It's a responsibility that they take very seriously. And so any changes to that system have to ultimately be signed off by the province. We are very lucky in British Columbia. We are, if not the only one of the few provinces in Canada in which the provincial government has said, while we hold the authority and while we have the responsibility to ultimately determine who's incorporated, who's unincorporated, how we're going to govern and structure ourselves locally and provide local services, well, that's our responsibility ultimately. We will be guided in those decisions by communities. We are, again, if not the only one of the only provinces that says we will be guided by what communities want for their local governance and their local service delivery and service provision systems. The kicker, though, is we will set out the process that they must go through. And if at the end of that process, they come to us and say, this is what we want, we respect that. But we set out that process because we know in order to fulfill our responsibility, we want to make sure that everything has been gone through very carefully. So that's where the process kicks in. Let's look at that process very, very broadly, and I'll show you where we are in this broader process of restructure. We start off, first of all, with raising issues. So the issues here have been raised. The issues in Area F of Regional District Nanaimo have been raised, and we saw, and they were expressed by the regional district, by the board on behalf of Area F to the minister. So those services were raised, and the minister then, or the regional district, in raising those concerns, requested a study, the study that we're doing right now. The minister commissioned that study. So that was a study is being undertaken now. We've got the committee in place. We've got the consultants hired. We've got the regional district staff ready to go. We've got Gareth from the province assigned to oversee and to kind of keep tabs on this study and to assist this study where needed. As a result of our study, we are going to look at different options for change as we go through this. All of this stuff is our current phase. So the request of the study, the minister commissioning the study being undertaken, and the options for change being identified. That's where we are, the Electoral Area F Governance and Services Study. That's our current phase. Now, let's say the options for change are identified. Well, I talked earlier about changes being possible within the structure. So if this committee and with input from the community determines that all of the concerns and all of the interests we've heard about related to governance and services can actually be addressed as an electoral area within the regional district of Nanaimo. We just need to change a few things kind of within that framework. Then we can make those changes within the structure and end our process. So it would end at that point. We'd make the changes within the regional district and it would end. If, however, this committee, with input from the community and advice from the consultants and all of the information you're going to learn about, if this committee determines that no, given the issues and given the concerns that we're hearing about, we believe that the only changes that are going to address those concerns, address those interests, are changes that involve a change to the local government structure. Then we send a recommendation to the regional board, and the regional board needs to consider that, because the regional board, again, is the legal body, is the corporate body, the governing body responsible for what's going on in the regional district. So the board has to consider that. And the board then, if it says, yes, we understand, we're comfortable with how the study was done. The study had a process that was full of integrity and that the committee did its role properly. Then the regional board would say to the minister, we pass this on as we kind of sign off on it as the corporate body here. It goes to the ministry. The minister then receives that and considers whether the study, again, they'll talk to Gareth, did the study follow all, was it within scope? Was the information, was the technical analysis done properly? Did it follow all the rules? And then if the minister determines that a new phase is required, such as an incorporation study, the minister may commission that new phase. And then the new phase begins. And that's where we have a possible new study. So this phase that we're in right now will not end in incorporation. It may end in a recommendation that incorporation be looked at in great detail and that a question be taken ultimately to the public for an answer on that. But this phase in and of itself is the first of at least two phases. And I mentioned that at the outset, again, because it's very important for us to know as we go through this study that this is the long game. We're on a bit of a road here, and it's going to be patient. We're going to need patience, and we're going to need kind of really to kind of roll up the old sleeves and just buckle down and get into this stuff. Because it's it's not for, it's not a quick fix. We want to, first of all, be very clear, we understand what the issues are before we even think about what kind of fixes there could be. And then if we identify a fix or a change, then the province will determine whether to do a further study then on that specific change. Okay, I'll pause there, Mr. Chair, and ask if there are any questions or if anybody's ready to quit. Sorry.
I would ask what concerns brought the need or the desire to have this study done?
That's a very good question. And I wonder if I'm not even, I wonder if I can put the staff on the spot here and just maybe you guys can talk a little bit about what prompted the study, if there, what kind of led us to write the letter to the minister.
Sure. Oh,
You got an answer? Okay, that came from the board, which came from the director, from
Yes.
Area F.
Okay.
Directors, because we have multiple directors have requested this. A bit of history, back in 1994 to 96, we did a restructure study. And the director then, who's behind me, was on the committee. I co-chaired the committee.
Could you please speak up?
I'm sorry. I need a microphone.
Yeah,
I have a
no,
soft voice.
no, I agree.
And I'm deaf. This came about because we were having problems with the regional district, which is why we somewhat referred to it as the regional dictatorship. And I can say that is well documented. In 1988, Daniel Campbell, the former Minister of Municipal Affairs, who was the minister when regional districts were created, intended the regional districts be very flexible, that they respond to local needs. Each electoral area would have their own bylaws if necessary. When he reviewed, 20 years later, he was asked to review a number of regional districts and their function. And he wrote one review for the regional district of Nanaimo, and it was damning. He said it was the worst regional district in the province in terms of functioning. And that was because Nanaimo ran a very centralized dictatorial system where the city used a weight and vote to force basically everything had to be Nanaimo's way. And there's been a long and very contentious history between Nanaimo and Area F going back. There have been multiple lawsuits. I believe 3 bylaws were overturned by these lawsuits. The last one was Bylaw 500 in 1985. And it had to be reenacted in 1987 with a proviso on the first page saying, except Area F. We did not like being ordered around by Nanaimo. And that was why we said the only way we can get out from under this monster is to become a self-governing municipality. And that was what drove us, the initial study in the 1990s. And I would like to get a copy. I have a copy of the study right here. It concluded that a municipality was feasible, but it didn't go any further because the Municipal Affairs Minister, Mr. Farnsworth at the time, and multiple, because we went to a lot of ministers, wouldn't fund the project to go further. And in the end, the people involved dissipate. What's interesting is that all the people most of them who were involved in that study volunteered to come back and do the job again here. Not one of them is sitting at this table except me. And I'm only here because Leanne is not here. That was no accident. And I can't tell anymore because it was in camera. But this is why, that's the best thing to say. Compare Area F with Pelican Beach. We've almost had identical populations for in parallel for the last 30 years. We're over 8,000, they're just under 9,000. Look at the newspaper. Everything that happens in Pelican Beach, it's reported, they make their own decisions, they decide this, they decide that. What do you see about Area F? We're invisible. Now, when I sat at the regional district, we found literally, electoral areas are invisible to the public. They're invisible to the newspapers. They're invisible because of the way they work. And the only way that we felt that we could get control of our own affairs, not have them decided by people who live 20, 30 kilometers away, is through self-governance. We looked around at every municipality. Not one of them has said, let's give up being a municipality, go back to being a regional district. That's how it came about. Well, I got elected in 2011. First thing I did, I made motions at the board that we move back and complete the restructure process. It got stalled, it got put off. The province said, nah, we're doing it somewhere else, not interested. It was Leanne who finally got the board to agree to make the request and have the province respond. And I think that was because the then Minister Josie Osborne, Josie Osborne, has a personal connection to Leanne. If it wasn't for that connection, we'd probably still be begging. Does that answer the question?
Thank you. Does that answer the, I'm sorry.
That gives me a bunch of background on it, yeah.
I guess how to word it is, what was the community's issues, not just the directors.
Yeah.
I think what the main question was, there's always governmental issues, but I'd like to know what the community's issues were.
Oh, well, we had big meetings in the fall next door. 130 people came out and about 30 spoke. And the gist of what they said, none of them said we're opposed to being self-governing. They simply said, what's it going to cost? That's what they wanted to know. What is it going to cost? And we said, that's the next stage. We have to go back to the government to get funding. And we never got the funding.
Okay, but still, what were the community's concerns?
Well, the ones that came and attended the meetings, their concerns were that the regional district was not listening to.
But okay, I've been a lifelong resident of Arrington, so I think I have a perspective on this. I mean, certainly what I've heard is it's mostly bylaw issues. People who live in Arrington do not want to have any bylaws. And the RDN at one point said, you know,
it was more we wanted our
there needs
bylaws,
to be
not their
some bylaws. Anyway, and it's a very contentious issue. If you've lived in Arrington for years, it's been an issue for the whole time I've lived here, so. And there's people on both sides.
I think that the trick is 200 people coming to a meeting is significant. But I believe there's like how many thousands in the RDN, and it's their voices we need to hear.
Yeah.
And there's what, does anyone know the number in area F?
That was just over 7,000.
7,000.
Yeah, so to me, the most important part is to go beyond the current.
Like 8,200, yeah. Okay. Any further discussion on that? Go ahead, Derek.
Well, this is all very interesting because, you know, we're all through our heads into the ring and going to committee, not knowing exactly what was involved. From my point of view, I would be really curious as to what everybody on the committee feels what's going to come out of the sausage grinder at the end. In other words, what do people at this point of the game before we do any study have as prejudices, I'll call them, or preconceptions or whatever as to what they want to see happen and why they got on board. I mean, a number of things came out of the meetings that were held online about the OCP, and there's always concerns with water. There's concerns with surrounding municipalities really eyeing the land for development. There's concerns about loss of trees. There's all these concerns about impacting on the rural way of life and recognizing there has to be some compromise, but to do this all intelligently. That's my take on it. Everybody else on the committee may have a different viewpoint. That's why I was wondering if we could all get our email addresses and Just communicate with one another what we all think and boil the cabbage down early on to see whether what we think we're gonna get out of this is what we are gonna get out of this. Am I making myself clear?
I think that that's a real tough ask to know at this point what people get out of it.
Well, you must have reasons why you joined the committee. Okay, so and everybody here has reasons why they got. And why some people were selected to be on the committee and some people weren't selected to be on the committee and blah, blah, blah. So I'm just curious as to the process here and curious on preconceptions and where people want to see things go. In other words, what's the sausage, what's everybody's idea what the sausage is going to look like at the end of the process? That's all. That's a reasonable thing, I think.
Yeah, thanks. I think there's probably an opportunity to do that, but I think we should be nice to get through this process. And then if there's any other questions, we can cover that. But I think that's a good idea for myself. For everybody else. It's gonna come up as we communicate with each other. I think organically it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be formal in a meeting. Is there any opposition to that? You guys?
No, I think the committee is its own body. These things kind of will evolve organically and you'll talk or you won't talk or you'll share or you'll decide to keep things to yourself. Some, I think, some folks will have a very clear idea of at this point what they want to see at the end or what they think will come out of the end. Others, and Carrie, this is kind of something you suggested, maybe will not have an idea of what this comes in is here really here, quite honestly, to learn the information before forming an opinion. So, Doug?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Ellen mentioned this earlier on. I think you will have, of course, cause for conversations amongst yourselves and go for coffee and do all those types of things. That's what folks do. And that's, I think that actually helps advance the conversation. But I think that something that Ellen mentioned earlier on, an expectation of the province, and who also, by the way, writes the legislation under which we have to behave, is that these meetings be held in public so that and it's not a public conversation if it's an email chain that goes around. The purpose is so that everybody who's in this community who has an interest in this matter can come and listen to these conversations. So that's a really important element of these things.
Do we have this is probably a public meeting, Mr. Chairman. Do we have that privilege down at the top of the board?
Mr. Chair, we have a spot at the end for public comment. Questions in the agenda. There is a
So I
spot.
think the rest of this meeting should be turned over to the public. I think there's a lot of work needs to be done here.
Go ahead.
I personally believe it's too early to do that. I think that this is a formative meeting where we learn the basics. And so I'm not launching into a lot of opinions would be the best route at the moment.
Yeah, so I'd like to answer that question. This want to answer the question back? Well, when she says she's not, the board member says she's not, doesn't think this should be public, this type of meeting. I totally agree with her. This should be a board meeting, a committee meeting. You advertise tonight as a public meeting for the public to address this board. Would listen an hour and a half of nothing but comments, what the board should be doing. That can be held in board chambers in the regional district of Nanaimo. It's not a public meeting. The public meeting is to get out and listen to what the public has to say that the board should be considering.
Maybe I can help, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, it would be nice to help.
Yeah, and I noticed that Ken has his hand up as well. I wonder if.
I'm just, as all meetings go, we approved the agenda. And this should have been brought up when they approve of the agenda. If somebody wanted the public, it's quite obvious what we're here to do tonight. And the next agenda should include the public in it and stuff like that. So, this is stuff we have to get through
Yeah, I agree.
before we can move forward.
I agree. I think the question was, do we open the floor to the public now? My recommendation is we finish the process, go to the public comments and questions in the end. If there's an opportunity, I think we can do that then. So.
But let's put a time limit on all that, eh?
I beg your pardon?
Put a time limit on it.
Yeah, I think, well, we do have a time limit. We're supposed to be finished at 9 o'clock, so we'll do
Okay.
the best we can to finish up at 9. So I think we'll follow that, we'll go through and we'll open it up for questions again. And hopefully we have enough time to listen to everybody that's got some concerns.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This meeting is the first of 5 committee meetings. And it is all the committee meetings, as Doug mentioned, all the committee meetings are public meetings. And every committee meeting will have a spot on that agenda for public to ask questions, provide comments. But as a committee of the board, we do, as Ken so properly put, we do have business to get through. So we'll get through that business and with you with the chair, David, and then we'll and then with your prompting, we'll open it up to the public. Okay, so when we look at the purpose, so we've talked about kind of where we are now within this broader process and the current phase at which we are sitting and the task of the committee on this phase. Our study has kind of a threefold purpose. So the first is really to look at, to document and to assess what I've got here is what is today. So we want to look at what is in place today. We want to understand and document in a considerable amount of detail. We want to understand very clearly what we have in place today with respect to decision-making mechanisms. So how decisions are made, governance, and with respect to services, what services are provided, who provides them to your Area F, what does Area F pay for the services, what are the tax implications, all that kind of stuff. And the reason that we do that and the reason we spend time really understanding what is in place today is because before we can consider what is not working, we need to have a very clear understanding of what is in place today. Some people will have a clearer sense, a different sense of what's in place today. Our job as a committee is to make sure the entire committee gets on the same page on that and has a common understanding. And then that information is communicated to the public. So the entire community then has a common understanding of what in fact is in place today in terms of governance and in terms of services. Then we can, with that understanding, we can start to then identify what are our concerns with that. So that's kind of the next bit. Once we then understand what is in place today, we want to then understand what the community's concerns are with respect to the existing systems and what their interests are. So if we hear, for example, and Alternative Director Fell has kind of talked a lot about governance, about at least in past years and perhaps currently still, about how there have been some concerns expressed in the community about decision making and who makes decisions, who gets the say at the end of the day. And if we may hear some of those, and we'll hear it after we've explained and after we've understood as a committee exactly what the current decision-making system is under which we live. So we'll hear that. We'll hear about the interest then as well. And then finally, to look then at what those options are, what changes the community, or the committee may wish to put forward for the community to consider in terms of ways to address those concerns and those interests. So if the community has concerns with respect to the existing governance and the existing services, what's the best way to address those? Does it involve change within the current system or does it involve change to the system? So we'll talk about that. And that's going to be the kind of a key purpose of the study as well. We've got our we've got our process that we're going to go through, and bear with us as we go through this process because it's important that everybody on the committee understand the steps we're going to be taking. And as Ken noted earlier, we not only do we have an agenda that we're following, but we have a process that we're following as a committee. So we've laid that out, and my colleague Sherry is going to go through this process for us.
Just give Alan a break and maybe you guys a break as well from listening to him the whole time. Thank you.
You're fired.
Sorry. I don't think you can fire
Yeah,
me.
I know.
So I'm just going to take you through, again, you have this in your proposal package. So this is just going through our process that is in your agenda package, but I'll just touch on a few points as I go through. And again, we have the schedule that we proposed up on the screen there. This is our first committee meeting. That's where we are in the process. Of course, this was shown as being in April, so we're already behind schedule. But we have lots of time to catch up. So in our first committee meeting, as you've already seen, we're going through a lot of the roles and responsibilities for the consultants, for the committee, for the board, all those business items. And then included in the agenda package is a background paper on regional districts. So Alan's going to be speaking to this in a little bit, but it talks a little bit about decision-making, voting rules, services, and finance. So there's an overview paper that we will be touching on in this first committee meeting. Stage 2, we've got here research and interim report. So this stage involves a lot of research, mostly on our parts, to prepare an interim report. And Alan's already touched on this already, but we will be going through in detail every service that is provided to Area F. And so not only just the services that are only provided to Area F, but even regional services that Area F is a participant in. So we'll be going through service by service, detailing what the service is, what's the purpose of the service, what the governance structure is, so how decisions are made on that particular service, whether there's any advisory committees, so all that information, what the services cost, how those costs are recovered, whether it's through taxes or through other means. So all that detail, service by service. So it is quite a lengthy and I won't say difficult read, but there's a lot of information in there. So we'll be doing all the research on that in this stage 2. The other component of the interim report is also a profile. So there's some information on Area F with respect to population, economic, assessment base, that type of information. So once we've gone through all of that, we will be bringing that to our second committee meeting. So you guys will all get a copy of the draft report in advance of our second committee meeting, which we will actually be going through after this, all the proposed dates for our committee meetings. So I won't refer to them specifically yet, but that's what happens in our third stage. Our second committee meeting is to review that interim report. So once we've all understood what's in that interim report, make any revisions that are recommended by the committee to that. In stage 4, we're looking at turning that information into our community engagement process. So during stage 4, we will be sharing our community engagement strategy, and we'll be going through all the materials that we will want to be taking to the community in our community engagement process. We've touched on in our proposal some of the components that we expect to include in a community engagement process, but all of that is subject to any guidance or changes made by the committee. So we've talked about having open houses, and usually an open house, at least from our perspective, usually involves an in-person meetings. It's very nice to have in-person meetings again. We've had some of these through Zoom, but where we have informal periods where people can review poster boards. We also at the open house have presentations made by the consultants. We have question and answer period, and we just have more informal interactions with the committee and with the public at those open houses. So right now we're proposing 5 of those open houses. We also are proposing an overview booklet that takes the information that we have in an interim report and it distills it down to a much more digestible format, a few pages over an overview booklet. We usually provide that on our website, but also hard copies at our open house meetings so people can take them home. We often also have them mailed out. If there's other mail outs going out from the regional district, we'll include those in it so that it gets mailed out to residents as well. so that the residents have different opportunities to pick up and review that material. We also have a study website. In fact, we already have a study website, so it's already up and running. But that website is also a key part of our engagement, but also our information sharing tool. So we will be posting things like our meetings, as well as any information, our interim report, our overview, all that information will be posted on the study website. We also propose some stakeholder group meetings. So again, we can have these presentations of the overview materials at community or community group meetings if they want to invite the committee to come make presentations. So we can meet with them individually and have sort of smaller stakeholder group meetings. And lastly, at the end of our open houses, so after our 5 open houses, we're also proposing having a survey, which would be posted on the same website. So on the Regional District of Nanaimo's Governance and Services Study website, we would host a survey on that as well. And we're proposing it right now at the end of the open houses. So people would have the opportunity to come to the open houses, read the overview, start to learn a bit about the process before then, think about it a little bit and have time to digest that information before we have the survey where they have another opportunity to let us know what their concerns and issues are. So that's just touching on some of the proposed engagement process, but that's what we'll be doing in stage 4 is bringing forward the materials that we've been proposing in draft for the committee to review and make comments on, as well as the strategy as a whole. So stage 5 up here, we would have a 4th meeting. And the main purpose of that meeting is to go through what we've heard from that community engagement process. So from the open houses, from the survey, all those engagement activities, and bring the information back in this 4th committee meeting to talk about what we heard. We will have also, from what we've heard, we will start to identify themes, but also potential options for addressing some of those concerns that we've heard through the community. Stage 6 will be bringing forward a draft report. So that's really incorporating everything up until that point. So we already have sort of the interim report as the basis, and then we've had our community engagement. So we will be explaining the community engagement process that we've been through, as well as bringing forward all that material that we've heard from the community. So what we heard, what the issues that were identified for them from the community, and then the options for addressing those. So we'll be compiling all of those into the draft report. And at that 5th committee meeting, again, making sure that we've brought forward the concerns from the community, options for addressing those concerns, and making sure that the committee is really satisfied with the options that we've been presented with to maybe address some of those concerns, making sure those are fully explored, fully understood, and fully evaluated so that they are able to then make recommendations if that's what they're choosing to do. And then what follows from that is our final report. So we're listening to what the community says and what the committee wants to do from the stage 6 with the draft report. And then we will put any recommendations that the committee wants to make into that final report that then gets presented to the Regional District Board of Directors. So that's the sort of process that we've laid out here. We have almost a year to get through this because we do have a bit of a pause again for the election process, but lots of work to get done over the course of it. And then our engagement mostly through November, bit of a break for the Christmas break, again in January. So that's sort of our main period of engagement, and then wrapping it up into the spring of next year.
Thank you.
There. Any questions on the process?
No comment, it seems very long-winded to me, that's all. Go ahead.
I think that when I consider, for example, the process for our most recent OCP event and the workbooks and things that came along, they didn't necessarily feel like a good fit For Area F, as far as participating, I mean, we made sure there were 4 of us sitting there going through that very last minute. It was really painful. And what might have been easier would have been something that would have, say, a question, yes, no, and then comments, and something that you could easily either on paper or on the computer, just quickly make your thoughts known instead of have to go through all the onerous hoops.
Okay, that's good feedback. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Excuse me, it seems no matter how this process evolves, there seems to be no way to shortcut the length of time it's going to take. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, there are certain parts that will take a certain amount of time for sure, like the interim report in particular.
If it so happens that we could expedite it in some way due to, circumstantially, if it happens that way.
Yeah.
Is it possible we could shorten the time span down?
Yeah, I think,
I mean, this is just the very first stage of another, this
yeah,
process,
yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that part. Yeah, I mean, there's some parts of once we're through the engagement, I mean, some of that we're planning out now, and there is sort of a blackout period. So once you've heard the feedback from the community, so once you're in January, yeah, it takes a bit of time to write up but you may be able to finish a little bit sooner than that. I think the biggest thing that you don't want to rush is your community engagement period. That would be my only, yeah. But as soon as that part is done, and as long as at that point, it really becomes how thoroughly the committee wants to, like, what we hear, what options might be for addressing those concerns. And really the committee will guide how many of those we want to explore further, or if they have any other questions on that. But if it's quite obvious what comes out of it, then maybe it is faster to finish. Yeah, that part's hard to estimate if it's possible to go faster.
Maybe, Mr. Chair, I can just add a comment to Sherry's comments. Totally understand the sentiment. And yes, we would love to finish it sooner as well. Not that we're not looking forward to it, but we would love to finish it, be as quick as possible as well. One of the things we found from experience is when we've got about an 11-month process here. We have recent studies we've done in the last few years of a similar nature in other communities. We tried to kind of put in a 6-month or 7-month period, and invariably they got extended because the committee wanted more information, the community needed another open house, these kinds of things. And so we kind of, I suppose this timetable has the benefit of a bit of experience. The other point is we are, in August, we've got a month kind of that's off there, because August tends to be a month that's very difficult as a starting point for our engagement period. And then October, we've got this crazy thing called an election. So that's kind of a period that everything stops in local government as well. And then we've got December, which is historically not a great month to reach out to people because they're busy doing things. That said, if we hear from the committee kind of as we're in the middle of our engagement that, everybody's hot to trot and we want to kind of get these meetings kind of done faster or with smaller intervals in between, then we will be guided by the committee on that for sure, Mr. Chair.
Just a question for you, with your community engagement and open houses. This was a public meeting. It was advertised. Got a very small group of people of 8,000 residents in this area. I think as we go, we want to have this exposed to as many people as possible, and it may take more than one open house, or more than one open house in each community. So I don't know if we should. I mean, if it's working out that we got a full house, I think that's great. But we need to make sure that we're getting this information out, getting feedback from people.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and I think to your point, Mr. Chair, that's when we'll just need to we've laid out a very kind of linear process with very specific steps and timelines and so forth, but that's kind of how we start, and it's gonna, it may not be as linear by the end, so we want to kind of be flexible, in other words, or we want to provide for looping back if we need to make sure that we have reached the people that need to be reached and so forth. So yeah, we will be certainly flexible in that respect.
Excellent. Go ahead, Derek.
One of the reasons that I brought up about the communication amongst the committee members is to make things expedited as quickly as possible. My only experience with an RDA committee is I was a member of the Climate Action Technical Advisory Committee, and I was very impressed by the collegiality of that group. We frequently communicated with each other with emails on points that we had discussed in the meetings and clarified things so we didn't fall things down, because everybody had strong opinions, and we took a giant amount of suggestions and boiled the cabinet down to a relatively few number of things, which the board of directors passed without comment and then operated. So that's one of the good things that would come out of a discussion of people in just the committee, that it would be all become public, because we would all discuss this. The next time it will become a public thing. But this prevents people getting too set in a certain viewpoint and any hard feelings. There was some discussion. I'm coming from the alternative energy, and I had some BC Hydro comments, and the guy worked with BC Hydro, and we did emails back and forth to everybody in the group, and we all knew what was going on. Everything was cool. But that's why, in my opinion, we all need to communicate. Because there was no feeling that the KCAT committee was in any sense a rubber stamp for anything. And this particular exercise we're going through, because of this, in my opinion, perhaps others, political sensitivity, by not having as open a discussion as possible with everybody from anywhere, will be viewed as a problem. Okay, that's why I'm bringing this up.
Thanks. Anyone else? Not hearing any more. Okay. We're going to meeting schedule now.
Well, we've got one more exciting portion first before that.
Okay, you skipped some, went down.
Did I? Oh, yeah, no, that was Sherry's fault. She did that. Yes. So, okay, what we wanted to do in this meeting is not just lay out the groundwork, not just set out the rules and expectations and the process and all that kind of stuff, but also start to get into a little bit of the meat, as it were. And so we want to one of the things that we're going to need to have a very clear understanding about as a committee is kind of how, and ultimately to the community is kind of, how does this system of local government in which we are part, or of which we are a part, work? And what are the different kinds of options out there? What are the different kinds of types of governance and types of service models and so forth? And so we've got a discussion paper or a kind of a background paper in the package. It's called Regional Districts in British Columbia. And I'm going to go through this at a very high level and just capture some key themes. And as I do, I'll make some comparisons between electoral areas or regional district governance, local governance, and municipalities, just to start to kind of get this stuff into onto the table, as it were, so we can start to digest it, and ultimately this material will come back again, and we'll want to present some of this and share some of it with the community too. But let's jump in, if we could, and talk a little bit about regional districts in British Columbia, and we'll compare and contrast as we go through this and talk about municipalities to get a sense of the different ways we can govern ourselves locally within British Columbia. The first thing to understand about regional districts is that they're federations. Somebody mentioned earlier that if we had our own municipality, we could get out of the regional district. Well, sorry, it doesn't work that way. Regional districts are like Hotel California. You can never leave once you check in. So whether you're an electoral area or a municipality, you're in. So the entire province, with the exception of one small area, is part of one or another regional district. And every regional district is a federation. It's a federation of local jurisdictions. Some of those jurisdictions are municipalities, and some are electoral areas or unincorporated areas. But together they create a regional district. And they have a board of directors, and representatives from all of the local jurisdictions sit on that board of directors. So we'll talk about that in a moment, but they're federations. They exist primarily, as all government does to some degree, but local government and regional districts in particular, they exist to provide services. There are three different kinds of services that regional districts provide. One is local services, the basic local services. So the basic local government services to electoral areas. So one thing that you may know is that a regional district is the local government for the electoral area, for the unincorporated area. And it is responsible for providing the basic local government services, things like administration, electoral area planning, and a bunch of other basic services that every jurisdiction needs, whether you're a municipality or a small jurisdiction or a larger unincorporated jurisdiction. So basic services, water, community planning, fire protection, those kinds of things. That's the first type of service. The next type of service is kind of what we call sub-regional services. I talked about regional districts being federations. Well, regional districts act as a mechanism for different members of the federation to collaborate, to come together, and through the regional district to provide services that they all benefit from. So you can have specific services that are provided by a regional district to collections of jurisdictions across, or in the sub-regions, if you will. And we've got a number of those with the RDN. Some of them are specific to kind of the southern jurisdictions and includes some municipalities and some electoral areas. Some are more specific to the Oceanside ones. So the Qualicum Beach, the Parksville, the electoral area F, and I believe electoral area G would be the other one. So some of those areas, they kind of have come together through the regional district to receive certain services that the others don't. So we've got those sub-regional services. And then the third one are what we call the true regional services. Those are services, solid waste management planning, for example, 911 service, those kinds of things that are provided across the entire regional district to all jurisdictions. So we've got our regional services, our sub-regional services, and our local electoral area services, and they're all provided by the regional district. I talked about the board of directors. So the governing body of the regional district is the board of directors. And the board of directors has two different types of directors sitting on the board, as you probably know. One, we have electoral area directors. So we've got our electoral area director here, Director Salter, in Area F, who is elected directly by the electors, that is the community, the voters here in Area F, to represent Area F on the regional district board. In every electoral area, we have one person who is directly elected by the voters to sit on the board and represent that electoral area as a director. We also have municipal directors who are not elected directly by their constituents to sit on the regional board. They're elected to their local councils. Their councils then appoint them to the regional board. So we've got some big differences in there right away. Some are directly elected to the board, others are appointed by their councils. And that's one of the, incidentally, that is something that really makes regional districts distinct from other regional governments, regional governance bodies in other provinces, where we tend to have people elected directly to those regional bodies, even from municipalities. In our case, they're appointed by councils as municipal directors. We have very unique voting rules in electoral areas. All right, in regional districts. So in a municipality, we have, for example, it's a very simple system. Every matter that comes before council, whether it's a resolution or a bylaw, every matter that comes before council is voted on by all members of council, including the mayor, and everybody gets one vote. Totally different situation in regional districts, where we have different voting rules. We have a few voting rules. First of all, we have three different types of votes. We have corporate votes that are unweighted. So a corporate unweighted vote is where every director from the regional district, every director who's at the table from all jurisdictions gets to vote on a matter and gets one vote, irrespective of the size of the jurisdiction they're representing. If they're at the table as a director, whether it's an electoral area director or a municipal director, they get one vote on these matters. And those kinds of things are when you want to vote to establish a bylaw to create a new service. And so why would you ask, every bylaw, for every establishing bylaw for a new service must be voted on by the entire board using this unweighted corporate vote system. Even if bylaws in that aren't going to, or even if the service that is created through those bylaws doesn't apply throughout the entire regional district, everybody votes on that as a corporate vote. And that's because the corporation is the body that ultimately is responsible for that service and liable for that service. So everybody gets a vote on that. Now, we then have corporate weighted votes. So as you know, in regional district of Nanaimo and in every regional district, we have different sized jurisdictions. We've got in Nanaimo a very large jurisdiction, the city of Nanaimo with 100,000 people, and we've got smaller jurisdictions, Lansville with 3,500 people, for example. Smaller than most of the or some of the electoral areas at least. In a corporate unweighted vote, the directors get a number, every jurisdiction gets a number of votes that is commensurate to its population. So the larger jurisdictions get more votes, the smaller jurisdictions get fewer votes. Those kinds of votes then are used in a weighted voting system for big money issues. So when we're passing a budget, for example, everybody gets to vote as a corporate vote, but everybody gets a certain number of votes depending on the population of their jurisdiction. And that's because population tends to, doesn't always, but tends to correlate with how much you pay for the service. Oh, hey, Gareth. Anyway, so you've got the different populations will kind of determine how many votes you get in a corporate weighted. So all the money matters, whether you're passing a budget, whether you're buying property, whether those kinds of things are disposing of property. Those are all matters that require this corporate weighted vote. And the places with more people that tend to be larger, therefore, and tend to have, not always, but tend to have more kind of skin in the game in terms of funding, they get a bigger say in those matters. If we look here on the board, you can see then how many votes each jurisdiction gets in the regional district of Nanaimo. And we see, for example, on a corporate weighted vote system, and these are from 2016 because we don't yet have the 2021 census figures put out into the voting system. But here we've got 37 votes in a corporate, well, out of 68 total votes in a corporate weighted voting matter, 37 of those are given to the city of Nanaimo, 6 to to Parksville, 4 to Qualicum Beach, 2 to Lansville, and Area F, we get 4 as well because we've got a population that entitles us to 4 votes in a weighted vote system. But we heard earlier that in these kinds of matters, it is possible for one jurisdiction to, in essence, kind of decide matters. And we see that if all the directors who represent the largest jurisdiction here, the city of Nanaimo, voted together on a matter, Nanaimo could determine the outcome of that matter. They do on some matters on corporate weighted. Yeah, and one could argue, okay, well, boy, that doesn't sound fair. But on the other hand, well, Nanaimo is the largest jurisdiction and therefore pays the most towards the regional district in its affairs. So if we are voting on budget matters that everybody's going to be on the hook for, maybe that's not a bad system then to give the larger and the ones that are paying more of a say on that matter. But I'm not stating kind of facts or anything. These are opinions. These are just kind of observations more than anything. We talk about local service bodies. When we, in a municipality, the council is, especially a large municipality with more than 5,000 people. So it doesn't sound that large, but a large municipality of over 5,000 people. A municipal council is responsible for most local services. So all of the services that we tend to think of really when we think of a municipality, whether we're talking about planning, whether we're talking about parks and recreation, roads, very important, very expensive, road services, engineering services, and if we're over 5,000 people, we're also responsible for policing services. So we provide police if we're a municipality. That's different than an electoral area. In an electoral area, we're responsible through the regional district for many of those services, parks and recreation, water, sewer, those kinds of things. but we're not responsible for local roads, and we're not responsible for policing. No matter how big we get, we're not responsible for those things. And that's a fundamental difference between regional districts and municipalities. And incidentally, it's one reason why, notwithstanding the comments that Alternate Director Feld made earlier, the arguments about wanting to have more decision-making authority locally, which is a very common idea that we hear, a very common concern that we hear in electoral areas that are going through these kinds of studies. So notwithstanding that and not diminishing that at all, what we often find is that when we start to look at the cost of different services, because roads, because police tend to be quite costly services to provide, we see then that all other things equal, the cost to provide services in a municipality are higher than the costs typically in an electoral area. And that can be something that can make the decision to change from one system to the other very difficult. Now, I will mention just as an aside, so folks, you may know I'm from the Okanagan area, and I live in the city of Kelowna, but across the bridge from my place is now the city of West Kelowna. Well, for the longest time, the city of West Kelowna was actually the West Side electoral area, even though it has 30,000 people. So it was the largest electoral area in the province by far. And for years, it had been encouraged to think about incorporation. It had gone through a couple of attempts, but they never quite got it. They never kind of got got to the point where people wanted to do it. Ultimately, then in 2006, and I was one of the consultants on the study, so I can kind of speak to this a little bit. In 2006, they undertook the full incorporation study at that point. Well, they first of all went through the phase we're going through, which took a little bit of time. Then they went to the incorporation study, which took a little bit more time. But in that incorporation study, all of the analysis showed very clearly there were three options they could choose from. One was to create a new municipality. One was to join the city of Kelowna. And the third was to remain unincorporated as an electoral area. And all of the information that we came out with over the course of the analysis showed very clearly that the most cost advantageous or the cheapest option was to remain unincorporated, because the province would continue to pay for the roads. The roads sucked, but the province continued to pay for them. that the province would continue to pay for the police, which also sucked, but the province paid for them. And that was the cheapest option. The second cheapest option was to join the city of Kelowna, which was about 4 or 5 times the size in population and wealth that West Kelowna was at the time. The third option, which was by far the most expensive, was the incorporate your own municipality. And that's the one people chose. And they chose it because it was more important for people to have direct control over decision-making than it was to save money on services. So there was that very clear trade-off. They didn't win by much. It was 51 to 49, but that's what it came out as. But interestingly, there were two, and I'm going off, so indulge me for a second here, but there were 2 questions in the ultimate referendum. The first question was, do you want to stay unincorporated, or do you want to incorporate, do you want to incorporate? Do you want to change? And not change to this or that, but just change. And the first question then, that was 80% said we want to change, 20% says we want to stay as we are, even though staying as we are was by far the cheapest option. So then the question was, do you want to create your own municipality, or do you want to join the city of Kelowna? And that was 51% create our own, 49% join the city. So most expensive option, governance there was the key issue. Not saying that's going to be the case here, but just to give you a sense of kind of how these things play out in different contexts. So local government service bodies, a regional district, but a primary local government service body for electoral areas. The regional district responsible for most of the services, but not all the services. We have the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure responsible for all the roads. We have the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General responsible for the policing. And then we have a bunch of other bodies like Island Health responsible for healthcare. We have the library system, which is a separate body responsible for libraries. But the big ones are the Transportation and Infrastructure and Solicitor General, so roads and policing. Fundamental difference between unincorporated and incorporated. Okay, that's your kind of lesson, as it were, on kind of regional districts. And I'll pass it back to you, Mr. Chair, before we kind of go into the last little bit and just ask, are there any questions or observations on our current system? Open for questions? But I will make one more point. I mean, this may prompt some questions. We'll see. But if I may, Mr. Chair, when I talk about federations, often people will say, let's go back to the voting rules for a second. When we look at our voting rules, we talked about it's not as simple as it is in a municipality where every member of council, including the mayor, gets one vote on every topic. We have a lot of cases where decisions that affect one area, like Area F, involve elected officials from other jurisdictions. In fact, every case that is going to be the case, because what if you are part of a sub-regional service? So if Area F receives a service that other electoral areas receive, decisions made for that service will involve the representatives from all of those electoral areas. If you have a fully regional service that involves, that includes all of the electoral areas in all of the municipalities, then all of the elected officials representing those jurisdictions will vote on that. If you have a local service that is just for Area F, everybody votes on it. And why is that? Because under the municipal, under the Local Government Act, we don't allow situations where you have one person, one elected official making the decision. So it goes to the entire board to make the decision. So in every case, you've got a shared decision-making authority. You've got shared decision-making power. And that strikes some people as being not right. But really, it's simply just a feature of the system where, as a federation, we share service delivery and service provision is how we pay for the services. So we share the cost of the services, and we also share the authority to make decisions for those services. It's very different from a municipality. And as Alternate Director Feld mentioned earlier, it means that we don't have full control in an electoral area over the decisions that affect us, but it's a feature of the system. And in many areas that seem to be quite acceptable, quite legitimate. And it is legitimate. It's just a different way of doing things. Some places are quite comfortable with it, some places aren't. Yes.
I have a question about infrastructure, like sewer and water for your utilities. Is there anything, does that fall under or change when it comes to regulations between incorporated or unincorporated?
The short answer is no. And I'm glad you raised that though, Jennifer, though, because it's a good question in that when we look at a lot of the services, the services themselves, not necessarily decision making for them, but the services, in many cases, there's not a lot of difference in kind of whether one body provides it or another body, regional district versus a municipality. How the decisions are made differ, but in that case where you have utilities that are that have specific user groups, whether they're provided by a regional district or a municipality, is basically the same.
Any more questions?
Just go ahead. If I can make an observation to that, typically smaller municipalities contract out their services to the regional.
They may do that, yes.
Services from each other.
Yes, no, very good point. Yeah, there's different ways to get services for sure. Regional districts are providing a mechanism, and they're designed to provide a vehicle for providing services together for collaborative service provision. But do you mind if Julian, can I just call you Julian? Okay, it's a mouthful to say alternate director fell all the time.
Some people call.
Well, we won't go there yet. Anyway, yeah, I've lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
Service provision vehicle.
Thank you. So regional districts, they provide the infrastructure, the service provision, the administrative infrastructure, that vehicle to allow member jurisdictions to collectively provide a service and to collectively pay for a service and to collectively govern a service. But as Julian just alluded to or just referred to, an individual or a municipality can work through the regional district or can have individual agreements with other municipalities or other local governments. Not the case with electoral areas, because electoral areas aren't legal entities. The regional district is the legal entity. An electoral area, being an unincorporated area, is part of the regional district. So it doesn't have the authority to make a separate contracting or agreement with another body. It has to work through the regional district for that. Mr. Chair, I think we've kind of dealt with the community engagement. Sherry kind of stole my thunder on that, but just on screen here, you'll just see this is an example of an overview. Is about a 10-page document that goes out in kind of electronically, but also in hard copy to different throughout the community, just to give an overview of kind of the study and all the findings of the study and to elicit feedback. We've got our committee meetings, we've got our open houses. We also do have in our proposal, and we're happy to do this, small group meetings as well. And so what we'd like to do in these situations is to make ourselves available within reason, but make ourselves available if we can to individual groups, and they can be everything from kind of association, like nonprofit associations or service groups, Rotary, whatever, to give presentations or to meet or to engage people on a smaller group basis as well. To, as was mentioned earlier, I think, David, you mentioned it just in terms of, you know, if we need to do other things to really engage people, we try to accommodate that as well. And then Sherry talked about the survey. And now we're down to meeting schedule. Thanks. Do you want me to just flash this on the board? Okay. We have 5 committee meetings and we have proposed, geez, very big part. Today being the first one, so we haven't got and this information will be sent out to everybody as well, but we're suggesting here some specific dates. Now, there's invariably in a committee this size, we may find one person may not be able to make a date and we'll try to kind of make it so that everybody can be there, but if we're down one, then we may collectively determine just to proceed. But we're hoping that by giving you these dates now and enough time, you can arrange your schedules to be present. Yes.
And can we zoom in as well? I mean,
all these meetings will be, yeah, and I think, and Elizabeth, I think the policy of the board is to now have everything both hybrid, is that right? Or to be available or?
Oh, yeah, that'd be much easier.
Subject to the technical availability. We don't have a lot of bandwidth.
Okay.
This particular one. So I think.
Good point.
I think if the committee wants to offer that, then we'll have to figure out the technical elements of that. Right now, what the board is doing for itself and all its committees is making everything broadcast simultaneously, or at a minimum, if that's not possible, then recording it and putting it on the website later so people can watch it on the website.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's very helpful. So did you hear that, Carrie? Okay, yeah, and one of the issues, and just picking up on Doug's point too, is one of the issues is if we decided to have all of the meetings in the RDN boardroom, then we could do simultaneous. That wouldn't be good, like, because we want to be in the community. This is about community. We don't want people to have to kind of drive to Nanaimo to the RDN boardroom to do that. So so hopefully by putting these dates out now, we can get as many committee members out as possible. And as I mentioned, we'll send this information out, Mr. Chair, but we've also got 5 open house dates planned as well. The first, and those kind of November, one on a Saturday in early December. And Sherry's already told me that conflicts with her Christmas tree purchase. So, and then in January, we've got 2. That first one, Wednesday, November 16th, is a very special day. It happens to be my birthday. And so anyway, that was supposed to be a joke. But we've got the 5 committee, we've got the 5 open houses there.
So we would make weekday meetings would be evening meetings, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Everything. Well, yeah, I think the only daytime meeting would be the Saturday open house. Yeah.
Well, you need daytime meeting too for people who don't drive at night.
Exactly.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Okay. And that's all we've got, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now we'll open for public comments and questions.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to address the board, kind of give you a history of regional district and area I go back, I've been a resident of area since 1947. So I know area from my school days on. I was president of Electoral Landowners Association when regional district brought the bylaw 500. And it was designed more on the lines of more densely populated areas than area was. But at that time, the Nile Council had a motion that when they dealt with their regional district items, their directors would vote the way their council told them to vote. Area M brought bylaw 500, whether we wanted it or not. As president of the Landowners Association, we took the bylaw to the Supreme Court of British Columbia. I was the first person that took it before. Bylaw 500 was thrown out because of the error in publishing. And area was excluded in bylaw 500. It was several years later, the regional district passed another bylaw that we have today for zoning and planning. One of the big issues with area was we did not want building inspection. That come along after bylaw for zoning. And again, it was put in because of the municipality. They said, well, we gotta have it to protect neighbors and that. Most residences in the area were on 5, the minimum lot size was 12 or 5 acres. And they went up to 40 and 60 acres with one residence on. There was nothing that resident would do that would affect the neighbor. But we got building inspection. And we got building permits. And getting back to about 92, I was elected director for regional district. I spent 3 terms as an office. And I was very involved when this area decided they wanted to go for incorporation. I worked hand in hand with a consultant, and we visited every club, I think, in the community, every fairground members and everything else. We had public hearings and public meetings that come up supporting it almost 100%. We had, as Julia mentioned earlier, meetings next door. There was hundreds of people, over 100 people out there. And this community did studies. I worked with Minister of Foreign Tours and the consultant. We did studies, costing right down the roads and policing and everything else. And it was put to the public and they were in favor of it. Unfortunately, I didn't win the next election. And it was by the communities around us, by law, the process was stopped. The local governance study, I give the consultants report to Elaine, and I would suggest that you look it over. Because this community went through the studies. We worked with Minister of Municipality, Mr. Farnsworth, and it was ready to go to a vote. And it never happened. But that's why this area is very against the regional district, putting more controls in, more bylaws, and more getting more involved in this community, because we do not have a say in what goes on with that board. Even today, we're outvoted on many issues that affect only area. And I suggest this committee take a hard look at any studies you come up with. And I think incorporation is our answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Who else? Oh, yes. David?
My name's David Needham. I'm third generation Coombs. My dad was born in Coombs in 1919. My grandfather came here in 1909. So we've been around. At one time, before all the roads were built, I had a relative on every road. You know, that goes back to when the regional district formed. We're paying for sewer in French Creek. Coombs was supposed to be phase 2. If you check the minutes when my uncle was the director in the Nanaimo, he actually made that be put into the minutes of one of the meetings. They're now up to phase 9 and 10 with the sewer, and Coombs didn't get it. So why are we paying for sewer? We were forced transit, and we would have been paying the same tax requisition as quality. But the only transit they were going to offer area F was DART service that you had to order 2 weeks in advance. So the community got together and did a counter petition. We only needed 10% to turn that around. We had 39% of the community vote against transit because we were going to pay the same bill as Squalicum. And who's going to order a bus 2 weeks in advance? When you've got a doctor's appointment you make for 3 days from now and you got no way of getting to it? No, that's why the community turned it down. We've been fighting stuff. A prime example is 911. The regional district, in their wisdom, was going to change 911 from North Island 911 to Surrey 911. They didn't. They didn't, Jack, for us. Because I was on the board of the Coombs Fire Department, I made such a goddamn stink. Because the communication loss between 2 different 911s is serious. So Parksville and Qualicum would be North Island 911, and we would have been Surrey 911. So we had a special meeting to have that reversed. If we don't have people watching out for us, the regional district steps on us like a stepping stone. And I'm willing to pay double the tax if I didn't have to listen to the regional district in Nanaimo. I've lived here on my property for I can't remember how long. I got a piece of property from my dad. We've always had bears on our property. Every 2 years, we'd see the young ones come out and graze in the hayfield. I've never had a bear in my garbage until last week. I always had bear-proof containers. What does a regional district supply a rural community? Non-lockable garbage cans. So now I've got to build a fence to keep the bears out. And I've never had a bear problem. My wife grows acres of berries and we've never had a bear in her berry patch. So are they thinking of us? There is garbage systems that have a lockable can that the machine unlocks as it loads the truck. Did they offer that to us?
Yep.
No.
No.
Yep.
Not the times I'm talking about. This is mechanized lock. It automatically.
Yeah.
And the truck unlocks it.
Yep.
No, you got one on your green bin, you don't have one on your black bin.
I got one on the black bin.
It was not offered to me, the bear tumbled me today.
I had to pay extra, but I got it.
Is that enough? Have you finished, David?
Well, it's just that, yeah, you know, if we don't go municipality, you know what I'm going to be working on? Transferring a portion of Area F to the Alberni Lake Walk Regional District. And I talked to them 25 years ago. And all they required was the majority of the area I want to move, sign a petition. We needed building inspections, now we got it. We needed zoning and bylaws, now we've got it. When I talked to them originally, we didn't have those. We do today. So if the regional district, you look at all this fancy stuff, you can have all the bloody meetings you want. Where does all this knowledge go? It goes to the board of directors of Nanaimo, and the city of Nanaimo gets to vote on whether we proceed further. So you guys are going to come up to a brick wall. You guys are just puppets. Good night.
Cool. You got a question?
Oh, yeah, Tanse, so we see this, y ahorita nos estudio, y cuando antes, nada más call for me again. Marcy Kepio, My name is Zoe. I'm a new resident here. I'm a Métis woman. I'm so grateful to live here in the unceded homelands of the Sanaas and Pelican First Nations in these unceded territories. First, I just wanted to thank the committee for stepping up and representing our community. This is really hard work. And it's hard work in a space where the community has felt it hasn't been heard on both sides. And so I just want to thank you first for doing this work, because you are carrying us forward, and everything that you have to say and all of this listening you will be doing over the next 11 months is so crucial. I'm going to try and keep it short because people want to go home. And I'm a little nervous. But my main question as a Métis person from the prairies, whose family has lived here on the coast for about 30 or 40 years, I've been very grateful to benefit from the lands of different Coast Salish peoples, is what role will reconciliation play in the considerations that we make in this process? First being that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's findings, calls to action include questions for municipalities in terms of jurisdiction that municipalities have in relation to First Nations. And obviously both Sanaas and Pelican First Nations have unanswered questions, ongoing treaty negotiations and things like this that affect Area F, particularly the Sanaas First Nation, whose treaty negotiations include Little Mountain and some other areas in the Parksville Arrington interface. The second question, I guess, is in addition to making sure that we're in good relation with our First Nations neighbors, how could we maybe also bring some of these questions of reconciliation into how you carry out your work? Because obviously people are feeling a need to be heard, and perhaps there is some guidance that Indigenous governance protocols could provide to us. I'm just speaking as an outside observer, a new person in the community, but I am very hopeful that you will take your responsibilities very seriously. I've seen all of you do that tonight, and I also want to thank those of you coming from Nanaimo. I have relatives who are members of Nanaimo First Nation. I know that leadership in that community have been working very hard to build bridges and hold Nanaimo accountable for things it has done in the past. And so I'm hoping that maybe we can also similarly here build in a way that recognizes our deep love and connection to this place, but also addresses the fact that the history of this place is fraught, both in terms of Indigenous relations, but also that within the community, there are different ideas of what living well together looks like. So I just wanted to raise that and say thank you. I'm excited we're doing this. I actually love governance. It's my favorite thing to think about. So thank you for doing it. Really, not just talking about it, but doing it. Thank you.
Yes.
I read the terms of reference a few times before this meeting, and to answer your question, they excluded First Nation people from our committee. The regional district was going to deal with them individually. That's what it said in the terms of reference in that handout. I wonder if there's any clarification to that.
Yes, the committee work doesn't involve First Nation interaction directly. However, the ministry and regional district together have reached out and will continue to reach out. Letters have been sent from the province and the regional district to, I believe, 7 First Nations have traditional territories that overlap and intersect with the Area F region. So those have been identified, research has been done, letters have been sent out both from the ministry and from the regional district, and we certainly take that very seriously. And as was noted in the comment earlier, thank you very much, the concepts of reconciliation and consultation and the ministry's duty to consult, which it takes very seriously, will absolutely be part of this study.
Will they be bringing comments forward to the committee here? What part, or is the regional district dealing with that on their own? Or, will it be part of the scope, comments from First Nations and stuff?
And Gareth, are you still there, Gareth?
Hi there, Elizabeth. Yes, I'm still here. I can answer this sort of to a degree. The way that the committee is structured is to speak to and the electoral area F community at large. That doesn't exclude First Nations. Should any First Nations communities wish to engage during the open houses during any or to attend any of the committee meetings, they are more than welcome to attend. And the important thing to note is that their attendance at such meetings does not absolve the province or the regional district of their duty to consult. So the governance study is exploring the existing governance and community perspective. Should the results of the governance study continue to look into additional options, such as Alan has already mentioned and alluded to, potential incorporation studies, at that stage is when the province starts consulting directly with First Nations to ascertain their perspectives and interests in how an incorporation, a new municipality, may impact their interests in their traditional territories. Alan can probably speak to a little bit around the sort of work that they had recently done regarding Sorrento Blind Bay. There was an incorporation study there which has a very robust First Nations consultation program that is attached to that. But the important thing to note here is that the committee is set up to determine the perspectives and the views of the community, and that includes everybody. But there is not a requirement for the committee to set up separate one-on-one meetings with those First Nations.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah. The staff member just referenced a document that lays out the interaction between or the First Nations that have land and plains in the community. Is that a public document that we can all look at?
Through the chair, it isn't, it's not a document per se. We did research as to what, because traditional territories are not necessarily set in stone or understood universally, of course. And so we did as much research as we could to determine which traditional territories might intersect, and then came up with a list, and then wrote directly to these First Nations. But we didn't get it from, there's not, for example, a provincial map or something like that. I mean, it is.
There's no document that we can understand as community members about what this intersection is that you're talking about.
We can provide a list of the nations that we wrote to. Yeah, and that was, it was done basically looking through information on the internet, looking through information on the First Nations own websites as to what their traditional territory was. Of course, these are fluid and flexible, etc. So we did with the province come to a list or a group, and correspondence has been sent to them. So we can certainly share those, the names of those First Nations.
How would you share that with them?
Well, we can share it with the committee.
Okay, so it'll come before the committee at some point. So this list.
I think so, sure. Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, just one other point, Mr. Chair. Gareth mentioned that referred to a study that both Sherry and I actually have been or were involved in, is now over, but most recently in the Sorrento Blind Bay area of the Columbia Shuswap Regional District in the interior of BC. And that was a study that was an incorporation study. And in fact, it started off, the broader process started off with the governance and services study, and then it ended recently with the final phase, the incorporation study. In that process, there was official outreach to First Nations in the area, both from the committee, but more importantly from the province, so government to government from the province. There was also in incorporation studies, what typically happens at the end, what always happens actually as part of an incorporation study, is that the Ministry of Municipal Affairs on behalf of the province will provide what's called an offer of financial assistance or an offer of restructure assistance to the area that is considering incorporation. And that offer of assistance will outline a number of different components, financial components, that are designed to help a newly incorporated area gradually kind of transition and cover some expenses that are incurred either in the sense of higher service costs or one-time expenses because different documents and plans need to be developed, those kinds of things. So this kind of package of restructure assistance included, and I believe it was the first time it was included in the provincial offer kind of around in all of these types of studies, included a component which looked at, it was $150,000 the province had put forward to say, if a new municipality is created, this money will be available to build, to allow that new municipality to work with the First Nations in the area and create initiatives together and build those strong ties together, build those relationships. So to Gareth's point, going forward into if this study ends up being a precursor to another study, that's when we would start to see a more official kind of government to government and also financial type of engagement with First Nations.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments?
Well,
Go ahead.
it seems to me, my name's Colin. It seems to me that all the policies and all the talking and all the hard work of people trying to come up with the best direction for the board, or the elected board coming up with these ideas and policies in order to determine these bylaws. It seems to me that when it comes to the implementation and interpretation of these bylaws, it comes down to the staff. And sometimes it seems that the staff, there's a lot of power concentrated in there, in that body. And sometimes it's like well, it almost like there's some interests and priorities that might not be in the original spirit of these bylaws. Something like perhaps what might make it easier for the staff to get things done than to implement the spirit of some of these policies and such. Some of the wordings of the bylaws seem to be really open to interpretation to the point that the original spirit might be lost, or it could be directed to a certain way that might be in concert more with some sort of unwritten philosophy that might not be the initial intention of these bylaws and policies, but more the direction of the staff or some body within the staff. I'm not exactly sure how to organize that with the group there, but it almost seems as though it's maybe what's more easiest for the board rather than what's the actual spirit of the bylaw, and which bylaws we might tend to completely ignore, and which are clearly worded for vague ones, which are more all-encompassing and easily to be steered, because there's a certain number of issues that I have with some things that are going on, that certain bylaws that are clearly worded and specific are being completely ignored, and certain ones that are not, that have vague definitions, are being sort of more put to a priority. So I'm sorry I'm not completely clear on what I'm saying. I'm trying to be as clear as I can be. Also concerns with the fact that it's sometimes seems to be administered more of like a, well, it's not a municipality, so it feels like it. It feels like it's like a territory or something, like administered by people who aren't terribly involved. I'm sort of not being clear. I'll try and have my thoughts clear next time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, it looks like, does anybody would like to make a motion to adjourn, unless there's anything else to be said?
I'll make that motion.
Chairman, I'd just like to point out that I'd like to see these advertised the state of the bylaw would have to be advertised. 2 weeks. We should be told this is in the local paper.
So somebody made a motion?
Yeah, good. Yeah.
But we're wondering if we're going to be preview of the next meeting.
Sure.
Did I miss that?
No, I kind of glossed over that, Mr. Chair. I apologize. Yeah, the next meeting is really going to be, the focus of that meeting is going to be working through the interim report that we're going to be putting together in the interim. So we will, Sherry and I will be spending the next few months before our next meeting, doing all of the research to kind of really nail down kind of what is now in terms of what services are there and how the decisions are decision-making works and governance works. And we'll be bringing that information back to the committee then, and you'll get the report well in advance, so you can have a chance to look at it.
Is it, can I, just because the next meeting falls into summer, are we able to decide if that date works for everybody? I'm sad to say it won't work for me, but I would really like to be here, but if it works for everybody, then that's fine. I just thought since it is summertime, it might be a good idea just to.
Yeah, absolutely. We are flexible. So, Mr. Chair, maybe, yeah.
Did we decide that Zoom is not an option? Because I probably won't be in town July 20th, but I could do Zoom. I will have internet.
Well, Zoom is as Doug mentioned, Zoom is going to be an option if we can kind of have the proper technology for it. So I don't know if we can definitively answer that yet.
Okay.
If we are able to do it kind of from a technological perspective, then that's could be an option for the board or for the committee if we have one or two out of town. It gets a little bit difficult if we've got kind of 6 or 7 people wanting to Zoom in because it's hard to kind of communicate the information properly. But
In these halls, it's not good internet for most of them. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So I basically, I'm just asking if everybody is comfortable with July 20th, or if anybody would be open to changing that to maybe, how, like, is too early in July is too soon for you, or? Because you guys are doing the report, right? I'll be able to try.
Yeah, that's going to be a little bit difficult. Yeah, if there's one kind of interval that we need that amount of time, it's that first meeting.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
So if everybody's okay with 20th, I'll be fine. I'll just.
Regardless of how we juggle it, there's going to be somebody that's not.
Oh, the only reason why I brought it up is because it does fall into July, which a lot of people are busy in the summer months. So that's why I thought.
But any time in July, they're busy.
Yes, for sure. But if a lot of us weren't able to make it, then it might be a good idea to change the date.
Early July for me.
I'll find out
late July.
mid-July.
Would you like to comment?
Yeah, and I was wondering if I could poll the committee for where they live. I live in South Arrington.
Can you describe South Arrington?
I'm sorry?
Can you tell us where the South Arrington is?
Well, down by Englishman River.
Okay.
Deep Arrington is known as.
I can give you a ride.
No, the reason is that I was wondering if this is geographically balanced, because I'm looking around.
I think it is, yeah.
I'm in Hilliard, so it matters.
Yeah.
I don't see anyone here from Meadow.
There's on the other side of everything there.
Yeah, that lady who was on Zoom, she was from Meadowville.
I'm sorry, Meadowwood? Anyone from Meadowwood?
I'm on this end of Middlegate.
No, Meadowwood is.
I know where you're talking, and I'm not from there.
Because the audience said the committee was balanced geographically.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing that.
That's a good point.
Did anybody maybe not step up for that?
We had a gentleman from Meadowwood, yes, he got shot down.
Well, maybe there was a good reason for it.
I can't discuss it because it's in camera. You have somebody wants to speak.
Sorry, just one quick question. Was this in fact advertised in the newspapers? I'm unclear. I was told this morning it was, because I completely missed it. And I just found out about it. Was this in the paper?
Yes, yes,
It was?
yes.
So I'm like,
That's how I found it. Online.
wasn't in the paper. I didn't see it, but, well, yeah.
I know I'm sad about that, but I'll get up and.
So I think as, Mr. Chair, if I may, I think as Jennifer has kind of alluded to, if I can put words in your mouth. is, the committee, the board has struck the committee. The committee is what the committee is right now. I don't think there's, if I can presume to say this, I don't think there's a lot to be gained by going back and trying to open up the membership of the committee. We've got the committee in place right now, for better or worse. It seemed like a good group to me. We kind of march on now.
Yeah.
In terms of the next meeting and having it available on the web, has anyone considered renting a Skylink?
That sounds very Terminator-ish. Skylink. That's it.
I don't know if they're for rent, but I mean, they're quite large, like 100 gig or something, you know? So there's a lot of bandwidth that you can just sit on the porch outside or whatever.
Gives you more stable.
So I've heard very clearly that if we can have some people connect to the meeting virtually from other places, that would help with the attendance.
Yes.
That would serve the interest of this work. So we'll look into that and see what we can do.
Okay.
Get back to the committee and talk about, if it is possible, talk about how it can be looked after and work out the logistics.
I talked to someone out of Winter Harbor that bought one for their lodge. And now their guests can make phone calls all over the place, you know? You know, they were on the other, I forget the other name, but you know, the regular satellite dish outfits.
Yeah.
At thousands of dollars. For $700, they've got all they need, you know?
Interesting.
Thanks for that.
Yes.
Any more comments before we adjourn? Somebody seconded to, somebody seconded?
I'll second.
Adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we will communicate directly, all communicate directly.
It's Elon Musk. He sends rockets up on a regular basis and they fly around and